All right, welcome back, audience, our Prince universe. Great to have everyone here for the wrap up to our brilliant panelists, Stephen, Robert, Zach, and Edgar, who really like enlightened us, and I would say nurtured my soul this evening with all of their really brilliant talks. And so thank you for showing up and for your presence and for pushing a bit. There are a number of questions that we've gotten from our audience members, but before we do that, I wanted to start with a question of my own, which is kind of like a theme that I've heard throughout all of your talks in some ways, the sort of how Prince represented himself, right? And then also when we think about the representation of women and the representation of race. And I think Stephen said like bright light or something like that in terms of thinking about the depiction of women, right? In terms of how women were Black adjacent looking often, right? So, or not quite there, right? So I guess my question in over time, because we feel like Prince is brilliant, he movies, comics, right, storytelling, transmedia storytelling, etc. And at the end of all of that, right, because of all the other kinds of ways in which that he represented women, represented Black men in some ways too, represented himself. We talk about the alter ego, maybe there's 4 dimensions of self. How much control do you think he had over telling his story? Like, I mean, was this do you feel that it was a deep sense of consciousness? I believe all of us, like in all of our artistry and our work as adults, we're trying to work out something in our childhood. So I guess my question is like, what was Prince trying to work out? But also, truly, how much control do you think he had in terms of, and how truthful was he in telling the story? And I'll let whoever wants to go first dive in there, and then I would love to hear from all 4 of you, your reflections on this.
Well, if no one goes, as for truth goes for this story and how much control he had, I think a lot of this story he tried to tell was based on improvisation, actually. In early '92, he sent Maite to Cairo with Randy St. Nicholas, and there wasn't a story yet. And he just said, film the footage, and all that footage it was used in the videos and on the stage shows, etc. So there wasn't anything yet, but they went and they shot the footage, and he made it work. So it was Prince. So there was a level of control. Of course, there was a level of control, but it was also an artistic, improvisation, putting pieces together and making it stick.
Stephen, you feel like I heard you have some response to something. It wasn't. Have you come in yet? Yeah.
I was just thinking about the movie, Edgar, 3 Chainz to Gold. I just don't understand what happened. However, I think to answer your question, I think Prince had a lot of control over telling his story visually, musically, absolutely. And the first example that came to my mind, I think, was in Mai Tai's memoir, where she says that Prince approved every picture. And I'd heard this before. He approves everything. And he goes, the one picture he didn't approve, they show him with shoes that he didn't want to have on in that photograph, which was published. And he goes, see, I told you, this is why I approve everything. I think he was known as being very controlling, in that way. And so I think he had a lot of control over that. And I think that Warner Brothers gave him that for the most part. Yeah.
I was really interested to hear, I didn't know, Robert, what you said about how he actually had approval over the comics, or I think Edgar and Robert both mentioned that. And that was always kind of my question, because that felt like, Piranha was an imprint of DC, of Warner Brothers, right. And so there was some corporate synergy going on, and obviously the story was Prince's, but I always, that was the question mark for me, because 3 Chainz of Gold, the movie, is unquestionably, even though Prince isn't officially a director on that, there's no way that anyone other than him was calling the shots for that, because no professional filmmaker would have made a film like that. It's complete. It's just like unfettered from Prince's mind to our screens, and honestly, that's what I love about it, because it is so weird. It's just such a weird movie. It's like beyond genre, so. I'm clinging to the control question, because I don't even know how to address the question of like truth in his identity. I guess what I will do with that is I think what's interesting to me about all of this is that ostensibly Love Symbol is a project about telling us it's the album is supposed to be like what he does at the end of Sacrifice of Victor. He's finally telling Vanessa Bartholomew / John Bream / every other, stand-in for like the establishment media. This is who I am. And this is who I'm going to be, the symbol. And so this is supposed to be the big coming out party for the artist formerly known as Prince. But I mean, it took us 30 years to figure that out. It's a very, very puzzling text, and it's not. So he, as much as he wants to like show us this new identity, he also can't help but frustrate it at every step. And I think that's what I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert, you wanted to say something? I see, Stephen, you wanted to say something again, maybe. So, Robert, go ahead.
Well, I'll quickly say that in that interview with Dennis Cowan, which was pretty recent, I think it was January of this year, he does describe that he would just sort of do the work, and there would be no feedback from Paisley Park, which was a good thing. And he took that to mean that he was doing the right thing, but he was pretty convinced that Prince was seeing, the work that he was doing as the artist in pretty strong detail. That he and God, why am I blanking all of a sudden? Dwayne McDuffie were doing. My God, sorry. So yeah. I think Prince tried to have as much control as he could. I mean, obviously he did. I just think that there's always a limit to what one person can do, even Prince. So
and do well.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
yes,
for sure, for sure.
So I'm going to put up a question now from one of our audience members, which builds on my question around the gender piece and representation of women, right? And this colorism challenge. And, and I have this question about Kirstie Alley. I've always had a question, was she about a moment in time? Because it was just, she was relevant at that moment. Now knowing all Kirstie Alley's politics and all that, but that's a side note. But so someone says, great insights regarding Prince's colorism. Like so many Black girls, I wanted to marry Prince, but wondered if he checked, quote unquote, checked for a brown-skinned girl like me. Thoughts on the evolution of his Black consciousness from Black. And so if someone wants to speak to that, it was directed directly to you, Stephen. So maybe you'll want to start and then others can build on it. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about the brown-skinned women that Prince was involved with. Kim, it'll come to me. Kim something. Kim Usher, who was actually played a waitress in Purple Rain. That was his girlfriend at the time. But kind of the idea of, again, all I know is what Prince put out, right? And that's usually the thing that I think most about. What are we supposed to be getting from these very visible romances of the women that he's been involved with, and what can one conclude from that? And so I'm not sure who asked the question, but I think that somebody, probably maybe even somebody in this symposium, knows more about behind the scenes Prince, because I always felt like we were always seeing what Prince wanted us to see. Sometimes some things no, but for the most part, Prince is he's a mystery to me that I'm not even trying to figure out, because I'm just enjoying the music, not enjoying the music, loving the films, not loving the films, but that's it. But because the other parts of it are just too difficult, to make those kinds of claims. So
anyone else want to respond to this question or build on something that Stephen said?
I'll just say that a lot of the chat is, I think, very rightly shouting out Camilla Cummings' work on colorism and Prince. And she's done some really great stuff on that. Certainly more qualified to speak on it than I am. So I would definitely, give her props for that.
All right. There are no other response. I have a next question from one of our audience members. So this is from Liam Berry. Would the panel agree that Paisley Park Incorporated was being pushed beyond its limits at that time, with so many diverse projects going on simultaneously? If anyone wants to take up this question around where they push, and this is why maybe some things were sacrificed, things didn't go as well, etc. So just your thoughts, any responses to this question?
I actually think, but I'm not sure, of course. Prince just had signed that $100 million deal for whatever the the details were from that deal, we don't know, of course. But I actually think that Warner wanted to get rid of Paisley Park anyway. And with all the extra projects going on and a lot of stuff happening, that was only clutter. They didn't want that. So I guess they used it as leverage to keep him to keep him small, literally, and that's what the whole fight with Warner eventually was part of that, at least. So I think that Paisley Park was on the way out already by the time this album arrived.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just speculation.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else wants to respond to that question? Yeah.
I was trying to remember, and maybe some of the other panelists can help me. I was trying to remember when the big there was an episode at which a lot of people were let go at Paisley, and it became a much more skeletal operation. And I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. I want to say that was actually it was earlier than the Love Symbol album. But it was roughly around the same time. So I think it's a really interesting question, because I think he was obviously, spreading himself super thin. And yet at the same time, I think for me, the interesting thing about the comic book is that he found like the best possible person or, team to be working on those books, and specifically with Dwayne McDuffie, so he had good judgment in I think in choosing other people to work with too, which at least made it more possible for that ambitiousness to work.
And it's very telling that he trusted Dwayne McDuffie here, because on all his other projects, he wouldn't have any. If there was a movie to be made, Prince would essentially be directing it, no matter who you put on there. And here in the comic books, he just trusted this one guy, and that's very unique within Prince's world.
Yeah, lots to say about that. There was another conversation another time. I'm going to put up another question from one of our audience members. Question from Jeremy Swinson. Is there any evidence, and this is about Prince's influences, right? Was there any evidence to suggest Prince was inspired by Queen and Freddie Mercury around that time? The sounds of production of this album sound heavily influenced by Queen, especially the extensive layering, guitar solos, and orchestra. Anyone want to take up that question first?
I don't know, but we do know that Freddie Mercury died in late '91, and that this sound evolved from there. So I'm not sure, of course, but the world was listening to Queen at that point in time. So it might very well be.
I want to say that I've heard something. I was hoping Edgar knew, because Edgar knows everything.
I don't know. I want to say don't know anything.
That somebody, you know what? Actually, I just saw Dr. Funkenberry in the chat. It might have been him. I feel like somebody said that Prince was listening to Queen around then. Yeah, I think so. Maybe that's where I heard it. Somebody said that. But yeah, Kim just mentioned Wayne's World was out. Freddie Mercury's death. Yes. Like I do think and Prince was like a sponge. He was always, his antennas were always up, and he was always just filtering things. Even if so, I don't know if he bought every Queen album, but I'm sure he heard Bohemian Rhapsody and was like, maybe I can try that. I absolutely believe it. I mean, there's no way it wasn't. Like that song is Prince doing Bohemian Rhapsody. If he said he hadn't heard Queen, I would think he's lying.
And like Stein says in the chat that the Super Bowl opening "We Will Rock You" says enough, and that's the truth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, who wasn't influenced by Queen at that time, if you were an artist? So that would be really hard to be divorced from that popular, from the popularism of them at that time. I have another question, but before I get to my question I want to see if our panelists have a question for each other, right? So something you want to raise up, something you want to reflect on, one of your peers have said, one of your colleagues have said in their presentation, if anyone wants to say anything.
I have a question for Robert. Because I've always been interested why there were only 2 comics, because they were fairly. So do you think that Prince would have worked on another story?
Well, that's a great question, and my answer is total speculation. that I think, clearly the Warner Brothers, conflict was what killed that possibility. Although, why he didn't maybe continue to work with Dwayne McDuffie or Milestone. One thing I really want to find out, and I think I'm just going to have to interview Dennis about this, is how aware Prince was of the Milestone project. Because it seems like it would have been something that he would have been totally into. And in 1993, that certainly makes the timing of it rather interesting, right? That here's this, this writer and other Black comics artists who are, stretching out and, creating their own thing. And so, yeah, there's a lot more to find out about that story. But yeah, I was wondering that. Like, I don't have a great answer for it because, like, I don't know why he didn't continue to try other, sort of different media. Maybe it's also because he did sort of becomes very fixated on the internet, right? I mean, we're moving into, Com and Gold experience and, the interactive thing and everything. So that might have been part of it too, I would love to see more Prince comic books. And my point about the Max and the Continental is partly something that I'm going to be bringing up to my students and say, hey, it's time that we make a comic book featuring these characters.
I'd read it immediately.
Like Prince as different, and just because I also really want the MPG to be their own superhero team too, but that's just,
Any other questions? I have another question that came from our audience, but I want to still give you all space if you have a question for each other. All right, I'm going to put this other question from our audience. So do you think that the estate should create content tied to projects that are not unanimously looked upon favorably, or should they give it to all to the fans in deluxe editions, comments, long form video, odds and ends, and just let us enjoy it for what it is? Thoughts about that?
I feel like this is a trap.
That was right, Robert. Why do you believe that? This is a trap.
Is this the estate?
Yeah. No, it's just because I think it's a hard question, man. I mean, because I want everything, right? Like as a Prince fan, I want it all. And I understand from a business point of view the need to prioritize things that will sell the most. I'm really torn. The rest of you, what do you think?
I mean, I always just come back to I don't know, speculating about the music business in 2022 is such a crapshoot because what is the music business now? We're definitely past the golden age of catalog reissues. We're past the golden age of physical media. We're past, it's just buying music in general is almost just something that us old people do. It's going to become a thing of the past. So, I always say, take this with a big grain of salt, but to me, I just look at so many much more niche products get remastered and brought back into the marketplace. So to me, it's not so much a question of they'll only remaster Purple Rain 50 times because that's the only one that's sold. And I don't think that's the case necessarily. I think that they spent those millions of dollars on the rights to Prince's catalog with the intention of putting out. So I don't see any reason why there won't be a super deluxe Love Symbol box set. Apparently there is going to be half of one. That's what people are saying, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But, I don't know if honestly, I have to have that thing in my hands before I have decided if that's a good idea or not. In theory, it makes very little sense. But I do think that, I think we're going to see reissues of Prince projects that were not universally loved because they're going to squeeze every bit of blood out of that stone, and I think in a way it could be a really exciting thing because we've seen reappraisals from other artists with really long histories. Neil Young puts out stuff from the 80s, and Neil Young's 80s was like Prince's 90s. But that could be really exciting to rediscover the weird stuff that people weren't checking for at the time. And I think I'm excited about that. That's the main reason why I'm looking forward to getting into the 90s, Prince wise, because I think there's more to discover there. We all know that Parade was great, but like, what can you tell us about the Love Symbol album, and like, how can you make me see that? And somebody who is already fully on board with 80s Prince, how can you make me see that in a new way? Now, whether the estate is up to that kind of recontextualization, we can argue about that, but that is what I try to be optimistic.
It's a generational thing too, right? Like, when I was in college when Love Symbol came out, and like, that period of Prince means so much to me, partly because of when I experienced it, and it's the same for everybody. So yeah, I mean.
So I think, I don't remember if this is Robert or Edgar brought this up in your talk around collective intelligence. And what I want, my question, this is my last question for you all, is as you think about Prince's collective intelligence we've taken from Prince, and this is both a personal question and a broader question, right? And so, like, what impressions has Prince left on your intelligence, right? In terms of from music to artistry. So why do you study Prince? Like, why is this, and it's like an artist that you occupy your time with? And then what legacy do you think he'll continue to leave with all of us? And it could be an evolving legacy too, which I believe it is, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, it's difficult for me. The reason I study Prince is because when I first got into music as a young boy, Prince was the first artist that I noticed, and then all the other artists that came afterwards that had to compete. And I first got to know Prince in the 1980s. So, well, that was arguably his first peak moment. And I was intrigued that one person could be making movies, doing tours, do everything. And I strive to do the same in my own life, and I fail miserably. But I find it very interesting that someone has dedicated his life to his art in the way he did, and I think we can all learn from that. And we should have learned from that while he was still alive, and we should have studied him more while he was still alive. And that's maybe where the frustration comes from in songs like Arrogance and The Flow, that the press was only interested in his shenanigans and not in his art. And I think and it's the art that draws me in, and it's the art that makes me wants me to study him more, because there's so much more to discover.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to hear from other panelists, but I'm just going to put a thought just as a provocateur a little bit. But one could also argue the fact that he tried to do it all is actually what took his life, right? And so that pace, that trying to do it all, trying to always be at the top of your game, always at the edge, right? Is a B sometimes okay, right? Then a B like an A, we're doing it all, being a trifecta, right? So anyways, I want to hear Stephen, Robert, Zachary, Zach, whichever one you want to go next.
I guess I'll bring it back to world building. That to me that's Prince. What I'm constantly stunned by, there aren't many, lots of artists put out great albums or even made great music videos or, had like iconography that really lasted through time. But I haven't found an artist that like has so many levels to Prince. It's like when I tell people, I tell people, oh, I'm doing this Prince Symposium this weekend. They're like, there's a Prince studies, field of academia, and yes, it sounds bizarre, but I mean, it's just what he created is incredible. It's insane to me that I can do, I can excitedly sit through these 8 hours a day of presentations on an album that I would not even rank in my top 10 Prince albums, and yet I am like fully engaged this whole time. It's just it's astounding. I think it's one of the greatest bodies of work in I mean, I'll say the 20th century, but that is not even doing it justice. You know, I think Prince needs to be studied and elevated and analyzed to the same degree that we do the Beatles, for instance. You know, and I'm a Beatles fan, but you know, but I think Prince is at that level, and I think it's beholden to us to make sure that he stays in the cultural conversation, because unfortunately he didn't sell as many records as the Beatles, so it's up to us to you know, keep him alive in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, Robert, Edgar.
There are 1,000 half-baked books about Bob Dylan out there. I would love it if there were at least, you know, 250 incredible more books about Prince. I think there's just to echo what everyone's saying. There's just so much. I do think of him as that quote about Shakespeare, right? That like from a certain perspective, if you're thinking about a certain moment in time, Shakespeare like is like an entire paradigm for understanding existence in life. That's how some people kind of look at him, right? And so I think, you know, Prince is, you know, my Shakespeare in some ways, you know. And you know, he's just a quick thing. It's been a difficult week, and I've been listening to Love Symbol, and there's moments in it that pop out to me that I've never really thought about before, or that strike me now just in a different way than they never have before. Even though, it's probably not a top 10 album for me, but like just the very end of 3 Chains of Gold, not the very, very end, but when it finally goes into the actual melody, 3 Chains of Gold, and there's like all that bombast is just gone, and it's just his small voice at that moment, alone, and kind of, and it just, that moment grabs me now, and it's been stuck in my brain all week, you know. So I think there's always those things that come up with Prince that just, you know, he's always new to me.
Thank you. Edgar, what's your closing thoughts on this?
Well, the thing is that I was just typing this, but I can say it right now as well. I think people comparing him to like Bob Dylan or the Beatles or any of the other pop musicians, I think he's even beyond that. He's up there with Mozart, Bach, Beethoven. He is one of those composers that comes by, well, every 100, 200 years or so. And people should take notice of that, because their music stands the test of time, and I'm sure his music will as well. But we have to take care of that, because you know, in the time of Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, it wasn't weren't any album sales. It was just the music that counted. And these days we tend to say that if you sell a lot of albums, then you're top quality, but that's not necessarily so.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, we're at 7:30, I think, at least East Coast time. I want to thank our panelists, Stephen, Robert, Zach, and Edgar, for either pre-recording your dog talks, doing your talks live, and then also sticking around to be in this lively conversation. Big respect to all 4 of you. Thank you again to D'Angela for inviting me to be a part of this space. I appreciate you and your wisdom, and for keeping Prince's story alive. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to make sure that, Stephen, were you able to did you say what you wanted to say about Prince?
Oh, did I miss you, Stephen? I'm sorry.
You did it twice.
Stephen gets the final word.
Yes, I missed you, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Actually, I was listening to everybody else. No, I didn't. I'm D'Angela, Monroe. I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. So we actually have one more final session that's optional. It's our close of the day, when Arthur and I usually are drunk from exhaustion. That's going to happen tomorrow. But what we want to do, actually, if some of you will come on stage from the audience and talk about your favorite symposium, or your favorite presentation from a symposium, or your favorite speaker from the symposium in regards to the 5-year anniversary that we've had. And we're supposed to start at 7:30, but I need a bio break, so give me 5 minutes, and we will start that. And then if you don't want to listen to me and Arthur, you can hang out in the lounge and talk to one another. Perhaps one of our panelists or a couple will go to the lounge and maybe talk to some people. And then you can also hang out in Fluid Space, which is a new area on AirMeet. And for those of you who are just like, I'm so tired, I love you, but I gotta go. We're gonna be back here tomorrow. The doors open at 10:30. And the presentations will start at noon. So thank you all. And I'm going to end this session so I can drink some water and take 5 minutes, and then we'll be back for our last session.